My name is Carleen Petree. I'm 42 years old, and on my mother's 68th birthday, at the kitchen table in the house I'd been buying from him for 12 years, my father set a folder down between the cake and the coffee and told me we weren't cutting anything until I signed what was inside it. He said it pleasantly. He always says everything pleasantly. There were 11 people standing around in my kitchen. My daughter was at the counter with the matches in her hand waiting to light the candles, and my mother had her good cardigan on, the gray one with the pockets, and my father slid that folder across my own table the way you'd pass the butter. "Go ahead and get that done, honey," he said. "We're not cutting that till this is signed." Nobody moved. My sister Gwen laughed the way you laugh when you're not sure yet whether something's a joke. My mother looked at the folder, and then she looked at the window over the sink, and she kept looking at that window, and I've gone back to that window 100 times since. The house is a 1940 farmhouse on 11 acres 4 miles east of Tarlton, and I have been paying my father $600 for it on the 3rd of every month since April of 2014. 146 payments. My husband put the roof on it himself. Our daughter learned to walk in the front room. There is no deed with my name on it. There never has been. Not one person in that kitchen knew what I knew. I'd known since the 3rd of February, and the tote bag on the hook inside my back door, the one with the church rummage sale printing on the side that my mother gave me, had 4 things in it. And I had been carrying them around in my car for 14 weeks, waiting to find out what kind of woman I was going to turn out to be. Welcome back to Porch Stories, where the woman who spends all day telling other people what their paper actually says finally reads her own out loud. If somebody in your family ever told you a place was yours and never once wrote it down anywhere a stranger could look it up, then this hour belongs to you, and I'd like you to hear all of it. Tell me in the comments what you've been paying on. I read every single one of them. And hit subscribe, because before I can tell you what was in that folder, I have to take you back to the 3rd of February and a furnace that quit in the night. Let me back all the way up. I want you to see the house first, because the house is the whole argument. It sits at the end of a gravel lane with a windbreak of spruce my grandmother planted, and it's got a summer kitchen off the back that nobody's cooked in since the 60s. And the floors slope toward the middle so that a marble set down in Sydney's room will roll all the way to the stairs. My great-grandfather bought that ground in 1941. My father was born in the downstairs bedroom. So was I. My husband is Rodney Petree. He's 44. He's a millwright for an outfit out of Foxburg that keeps the feed mills and the elevators running. And he has the flattest, calmest voice of any man I've ever met, which is a mercy because I am not calm. He came out to look at that house with me in the spring of 2014, and he walked the whole thing twice without saying anything, and then he stood in the kitchen and said, "The sills are good." That was the entire report. We took it. In June of that year, he poured a new back step, because the old one had cracked and settled and my mother had turned her ankle on it at Easter. He mixed it himself in a wheelbarrow on a Saturday, 1 bag at a time, and it took him all day because he is not a concrete man and he knew it. And when it was setting up, he called our daughter over, and she was 14 months old and mad about it, and he pressed her hand into the wet concrete and held it there for about 1.5 seconds before she got away from him. Then he took a 16-penny nail and he scratched the date underneath it. That step is still there. You go out my back door, and the first thing you step on is my kid's hand, and the month we started. Sydney's 13 now. She's tall and she's furious about being tall. She plays trombone badly and loudly, and she has a list. It's a piece of notebook paper taped inside the cabinet door where we keep the cereal, and it says, "Things to do to this house" at the top, in her handwriting, and it's got about 20 numbered lines. Paint the summer kitchen yellow. Take out the wall by the stairs. Fix the marble problem. Put a bench under the spruce. Number 9 says, "Get a dog," which is part of the house, and she wrote that in 2021, and she has never once let me forget it. She wrote a list of improvements for a house that was not ours. She just didn't know that, and neither did I. I work at Womack Insurance, on the square in Tarlton, 2 desks and a bell on the door and a coffee pot that's older than my marriage. Joanne Womack has owned it since 1979. She's 74. She's got reading glasses on a beaded chain. And she writes the date and her initials in the top right corner of every single piece of paper that crosses her desk before she reads a word of it. Every one. Renewal notices, claim forms, the pizza coupon that comes in the shopper. I asked her about it my first month, and she said, "Honey, half of what I do all day is tell somebody what they signed. I'd rather not have to guess about myself. Farm, home, and crop. That's what we write. Which means I spend my days telling decent people, kindly, in a small room, that the thing they remember agreeing to is not the thing that's on the paper, that the barn wasn't scheduled, that the acreage report went in 4 days after the deadline, and that 4 days is the whole difference between a claim and a conversation. I've watched a man cry in that office over 1,100 bushels because he called it in instead of writing it down. I'm good at it. I'm gentle about it. 12 years of it, and I still hadn't learned to do it to myself. My neighbor to the north is Marv Prater. He's 79, he farms the ground on 3 sides of me, and he keeps a radio in his shop that only pulls in one station, a country station out of Foxburg that plays the swap shop at noon, and he leaves it on whether he's out there or not because he says the shop sounds wrong quiet. He mows my ditch line without being asked, and he has never once mentioned doing it. On the wall over his workbench, there's a 16-penny nail driven into a stud with about 30 years of way tickets on it, a spike of them 4 inches thick, going soft and yellow at the bottom. And my mother is Ida Bortner, 68 this May. She quilts, she does the flowers at the Lutheran church, and she is the most careful listener I have ever been around, which I did not appreciate until this year. She has a singer in a cabinet in the front room of the house in town, the kind that folds down into a table, and there's a little tray of bobbins that lifts out. And my father is Elwood Bortner, 71. He ran a gravel and excavating outfit out of the barn for 30-some years, 3 trucks and a hoe, and he was good at it. And when he sold the trucks in 2012, half the county came to the auction. He is a large, easy, well-liked man. He's got a laugh that carries the whole length of a sale barn. When people around Tarlton talk about my dad, the word they use is decent. Here's how we bought the house. March of 2014. My parents wanted to move into town, and I was pregnant and living in a rental in Foxburg with a landlord who wouldn't fix the water heater, and my dad said the words at the kitchen table with his coffee cup in both hands. "Why don't you kids just take the place?" We couldn't get a bank loan. Rodney gets laid off every year between the fall shutdowns and spring, and I'd been at Joanne's 4 years, and we had $800. So my father said he'd carry it himself, the way people out here have always done it, and he went into town and came back with a form pad from the office supply on 3rd Street, a book of them, contract for deed, tear off the top copy, carbon underneath. He filled it out at that table in ballpoint, $74,000, $600 a month, for 15 years. He wrote our names on it in his blocky capitals, and he wrote the legal description off the tax card, and he signed it, and my mother signed it as a witness, and Rodney and I signed it, and my dad tore off the top copy and handed it to Rodney and said something I want you to hold on to, because it comes back. There. That's the last time we'll ever have to look at that. And when Rodney asked, real polite, whether we ought to take it in and record it at the courthouse like you do a deed, my father laughed that big laugh and spread his hand out on the table and said it. "We don't paper each other in this family." He gave it to me the way a man gives you a blessing. There's no other honest way to put it. Same voice he uses over a Thanksgiving table, same little pause in front of it. And I was 29 and pregnant, and I had just been handed a house by a man everybody in the county calls decent, and I heard it as the warmest thing anybody had ever said to me. The top copy went into the fire safe in our closet. Then, sometime in the first 2 years, in one of the moves of things that happens in a house with a baby in it, it stopped being in the fire safe. I know that now. I didn't know it for a decade, because why would I ever need to look at it? We paid, 3rd of the month, 12 years, a check, every time. And every year at the fair, he'd introduce Rodney to somebody as my son-in-law out at the home place. And every year at Christmas, he'd say the ground had been in this family since 41, and it was staying that way. And every time he said it, I drove home about 6 inches taller. I've been back through all of it, hunting the moment I should have caught it. I still can't find one. I can find 100 moments where a person with any sense would have asked a question, and not one where anybody gave me a reason to. The furnace quit on the 3rd of February. Rodney was in Foxburg on a job, and I woke up at 4 in the morning because Sydney was standing next to my bed in 2 sweatshirts, saying her water glass had ice in it. It was 11 degrees. I got the space heaters out of the summer kitchen, and we all slept in the front room, and I called the heating outfit at 7. The man was very nice about it. Cracked heat exchanger, 31 years old. He wouldn't light it again, and he wasn't going to tell me any different. $4,300 for the unit and the install. Or he'd sell me $100 a month of space heaters and a carbon monoxide detector and wish me luck. We had $1,100 in savings, and I did what anybody out here does, which is I went to Broadhead Federal Credit Union on the square, 30 steps from my own office, because a home improvement loan on $4,000 ought to be a 15-minute conversation with somebody you know. Krista at the loan desk has worked there 9 years. She's got a little glass dish of paper clips, and she turns her monitor around when she's talking to you, which is a decent thing to do, and not everybody does it. I told her about the furnace, and she started typing, and she asked me the address, and I gave it to her, and she pulled up the county parcel the way they do, and she turned the monitor around toward me. I want you to understand that she turned it around out of habit, out of kindness. She turned it around so I could follow along. There were 2 lines on that screen that I read at the same time. Owner of record, Elwood D. Bortner, and under it, a mortgage, Fentress County Savings. Recorded September of 2018. Krista kept talking for another sentence or two before she caught up to her own screen. Then she stopped, and I watched her decide, in about a second, that she was not going to make it worse, and she said, "That's probably just how they set it up for the taxes," which is exactly what I would have said. It's what I do say. It's the kind thing you say in a small room to somebody whose face has gone wrong. "Sure," I said. "That's probably it." I asked her not to run anything yet. She said, of course. I said something about talking to my dad first. She said that made sense. And I walked back across the square to Womack Insurance and sat down at my desk and answered the phone twice and told a woman from out by the lake that her detached garage was on the policy and she was fine. And I did all of that with my hands shaking under the desk like I'd had too much coffee. Joanne looked at me over the beaded chain once and didn't ask. That's its own kind of decency, too. That night, after Sydney went up, I went into the bedroom closet and got out the fire safe, and the contract wasn't in it. Deed to the burial plots, birth certificates, our marriage license, the title to the truck, Rodney's discharge papers. Not one piece of paper about the house we were sitting in. So I did the next thing. And this is the part where I have to tell you something about myself that I've had to make peace with. There is a drawer in my kitchen, second one down, left of the stove, where the mail goes that isn't a bill. And every August, Cattail Mutual sends me the renewal on my homeowner's policy. And every August, I take that envelope out of the box, and I walk it inside, and I put it in that drawer without opening it. 12 of them. I read declarations pages for a living. All day, every day, 48 weeks a year, I read other people's. And I could not bring one of my own into the house without wanting to lie down. It's not laziness. I know exactly what it is now, because I've had months to think about it. It's the same reason a woman who cooks for 100 people at a fish fry will eat crackers over her own sink. When the thing is your job, doing it at home doesn't feel like being careful. It feels like never getting to go home. I sat down on the kitchen floor, up against the dishwasher where the warm spot is, and I opened all 12. You know what a declarations page is, even if you've never called it that. It's the sheet that comes at the front with your name and address and the numbers on it, and about 2/3 of the way down the right side, in every single one of them, there's a box. Sometimes it says, mortgagee. Sometimes it says, loss payee. On our carrier's form, it says mortgagee and loss payee in small caps, and it's the size of a business card. 2014, blank. 2015, 16, 17, blank. 2018, Fentress County Savings, its successors and assigns, with a loan number after it. And then it's on every single one after that, 7 years in a row, in a box I would have caught on a stranger's page from across the room. There was an endorsement in the 2018 envelope too, the change notice, dated the middle of that September. Cattail Mutual did exactly what they're supposed to do. A lender took a mortgage on the property, the lender told the carrier. The carrier added the lender to the policy, and the carrier mailed me a piece of paper that said so. It came to my mailbox. It came to my hand. I walked it in from the road, and I put it in a drawer. Nobody hid anything from me. That's the thing I keep coming back around to at 2 a.m. My father didn't intercept my mail or forge my name or lie to a notary. Every fact of this was sitting in my own kitchen for 7.5 years, in an envelope with my name on it, waiting. The paper never stopped talking. I'd just stopped opening it. If you've ever found out that the thing which cost you everything was in a drawer in your own house the entire time, tell me in the comments, because I have not met one person who found that easy to say out loud. And subscribe if you're staying, because I still hadn't asked my father anything yet, and what I did next took me 4 Sundays. I did not confront him, and I'll tell you exactly why. Because it wasn't strategy, and it wasn't courage. It was that I could not stand to. Sunday dinner at my parents' house in town is a thing that has happened my whole life, and on the 2nd Sunday of February, I sat at their table and ate ham loaf and listened to my father talk about a fellow who'd bought a skid loader at an online auction sight unseen, and I waited for the coffee, and then I said it as light as I could get it. Dad, do you know where the contract on the house went? Ours walked off somewhere. I'd like to get a copy for the file. He didn't tense up. He didn't glance at my mother. He salted his coffee cup rim, which is a thing he does, and he said, "It's out there in the safe in the barn somewhere. I'll dig it out." That was all of it. And I sat there with my heart going and thought, well, all right. Maybe Krista's right. Maybe it's a tax thing. 2 weeks later, 3rd Sunday, I asked again. He said the barn was froze up, and he wasn't going out there and he'd get to it. 4th Sunday, 1st of March, I asked a 3rd time, and something moved in the room. Not much. He set his cup down a 1/2 inch harder than he'd picked it up. "What do you need it for, Carleen?" Not a question. He didn't put a question in it. And I heard myself say, "Just for the file." 42 years old, and I said "just for the file" to my own father in my mother's kitchen, and I hated the sound of it coming out of my mouth. Then he leaned back and did the thing that ended the conversation, which he has done to me my entire life, and which I had never once identified until that afternoon. He got warm. "Honey, come on now. Big and easy." And he spread his hand out on the table. "That place is yours. Everybody in this county knows that place is yours. We don't paper each other in this family." 2nd time. 12 years apart, and the exact same 8 words. And the first time it had felt like being wrapped in a blanket. My mother got up and started running water in the sink. She had not said one word. And then my dad asked me if we ever got that furnace squared away out there, 'cause he'd heard it went out, and I said we were working on it, and he said that's a shame, cold as it's been. He knew about the furnace. Somebody had told him about the furnace. He never once asked me where I'd been trying to get the money. I drove to the county seat on the 11th of March, on my lunch, and I went up the marble stairs to the recorder's office, which is a long counter and 4 computer terminals, and a woman named Marcella who has worked there since before I was married. Nobody asks you why you want it. It's a public index, and you don't have to be anybody. I gave her the parcel number off my own tax statement, and she showed me how to run it, and she went back to her stack. The mortgage is 11 pages. It was recorded on the 4th of September, 2018, at 9:51 in the morning. $96,000. Borrower, Elwood D. Bortner and Ida M. Bortner, husband and wife. Property, The legal description off my own tax card, the 11 acres, and the house with my kid's hand in the back step, signed by both of them in front of a notary in Foxburg. Nothing about it was forged. My father signed his own name, and my mother signed hers. Then Marcella showed me how to run the grantor index under my father's name back to 1980. 12 years of it, from March of 2014 forward, and there is not one document in that courthouse with the name Carleen Petree on it. Not a contract, not a memorandum, not a notice, not a lien, not a scrap. 12 years and 146 payments, and the county has never heard of me. That's the part that I couldn't get past standing there. Not the mortgage. The nothing. Marcella asked if I wanted certified copies. She said it's more, but they travel better, which I understood to mean she'd figured out roughly what I was doing there and was helping me without making me say it. I got 2 certified copies of the mortgage and 1 of the whole grantor run. And here's what a contract for deed actually is, because I did not know this in 2014, and I'd bet money most of you don't either. When you buy a place on a contract for deed, the seller keeps the legal title the whole time you don't get the deed until the last payment. So, if that contract never gets recorded at the courthouse, the county still shows him as the owner, and a man who's still the owner on paper can mortgage the house you live in without your signature and without one single person calling to tell you. That's not a loophole. That's just how it works. That's the ordinary, everyday operation of the thing. And it ran for 8 years while I mowed the yard. I sat in the truck in the courthouse lot for a while, and then I drove back to Tarlton and got to my desk 11 minutes late. And Joanne had put my calls on her line and didn't say anything about that either. Then I built the other half of it, because a mortgage only tells you what he did. It doesn't say a word about what I did. Here's the piece of this that saved me, and I want to be plain that it wasn't foresight, it was Joanne. My first month at that office, I wrote a check out of the agency account and tore it off, and Joanne took it out of my hand and looked at it and said, "Where's the duplicate?" And I said, "What duplicate?" And she went in the supply closet and came out with a checkbook with the carbon underneath, the kind where you write on the top and the copy stays in the book, and she said, "You'll use these here, and you'll use them at home too, and someday you'll know why." I have used a carbon checkbook for 19 years because a woman told me to in 1999. They were in a shoebox in the closet under the stairs, 11 books. I sat on the floor of the front room on a Wednesday night in March with the shoebox and a legal pad, and I went through them 1 page at a time, and I made a list. 3rd of April, 2014, $600. E. Bortner. And in the memo line in my handwriting, House PMT, 3rd of May, 600. House PMT. Every single one. 146 of them, and not one of them says anything else. Not rent, not board, not help with the utilities. The same 2 words in the memo line, 12 years, in the same handwriting, and I'd written them so many times I'd quit seeing them the way you quit seeing your own signature. $87,600 on a house he'd sold me for $74,000. I got the bank statements too, which took 2 trips and a form, and every one of those checks cleared, and every one of them went into his account. And then I sat there and did the last piece of arithmetic, and it made me put the pen down. His mortgage payment is $684 a month. It's on page 4 of the 11. Mine is $600. For 7.5 years, my father took my check on the 3rd, and it covered all but $84 of the note he'd put on my house. And he made up the difference himself out of his own pocket, and around this family that was called carrying us. $7,700. That's what my father spent in 7.5 years to hold this up. And the whole time, every Christmas, at that table, in front of everybody. The ground's been in this family since 41, and it's staying that way. That's the sentence I want you to keep. He wasn't lying when he said it. That's what I finally understood. In his arithmetic, it was all one pile. The ground, the trucks, the house in town, us, all of it his to move around. And putting a mortgage on my kitchen wasn't taking anything from anybody, because in his head, none of it had ever really left him. If you've ever been given something by somebody who never actually let go of it, put a word in the comments. I want to see how many of us there are. And subscribe, because I still hadn't told my husband any of this, and that's the part of the story I'm least proud of. 6 weeks. I want to say that plainly because I've heard myself soften it since. From the 3rd of February to the middle of March, I did not tell Rodney. I told myself I was waiting until I had all of it, that there was no point handing him half a thing. That's not why. I didn't tell him because he put that roof on with his own hands in August of 2019, 16 square, 98 degrees. And because he'd spent a whole Saturday in June of 2014 mixing a step by hand so he could press our baby's palm into it, and because he had spent 12 years being introduced at the fair as my son-in-law out at the home place, and I was going to have to walk in and tell him that all of that had been sitting on somebody else's line of credit since 2018. I told him on a Sunday night in the middle of March. He was at the table with the parts diagram for a leg drive spread out. I put the certified copy of the mortgage down on top of it and I said, "Read this one." He read the whole 11 pages. It took him about 20 minutes, and he didn't say anything the entire time. And then he squared the pages up and set them down, and got up and went outside without his coat. I watched him out the kitchen window. He walked out to the end of the driveway and stood there. Then he came back and stood on the back step for a while, on the step. And I knew what he was standing on, and so did he. When he came in, his eyes were red, and his voice was exactly as flat as it always is. "Okay," he said. "What do we do?" Not, "What did you do?" Not, "Why didn't you tell me?" He got to that later, and he was owed it. And we had that out. But the first thing out of the man's mouth was we. Here's the first thing we did. And if you take one practical thing out of this story tonight, let it be this one. We kept paying. Every instinct I had was to stop that check. It felt like the only lever I had. And it is exactly, precisely, the wrong move. Because on a contract for deed, the person who misses payments is the one who's in default, and the seller can declare a forfeiture. And then you are not a buyer with a grievance. You are a person living in a house you don't own who quit paying. The 3rd of April, $600, house, PMT. The 3rd of May, same. I have never in my life written a check I wanted to write less. Rochelle Hoke has an office up a flight of stairs over the feed store in Foxburg, and there's a jar of golf pencils on the counter, and she does farm ground and estates and divorces, and has for 26 years. She read everything in one sitting: the mortgage, the grantor run, the 11 carbon checkbooks, the 12 declarations pages, with the box filling in halfway down the stack. She didn't take notes. When she got to the end, she took her glasses off. "You've got a good story and a real problem," she said. "Let me tell you the difference." Then she gave me the honest one, and I've been recommending her to people ever since on the strength of the next 90 seconds. She said that in this state, a person who's living on the ground, in the open, paying, has an argument that a lender is supposed to look at who's actually out there, and that if it went to a judge, I'd very likely win. And then she said the rest of it, that it would take somewhere between 2 and 3 years, that it would cost more than the equity I was fighting for, that the mortgage sitting on it doesn't care how the lawsuit comes out and keeps accruing the whole time, and that if I spent 3 years and $40,000 proving I was right, my mother would be 71 and my daughter would be 16, and I'd have won a house I couldn't afford to keep. "Winning is a thing lawyers sell," she said. "What you want is the deed. Those aren't the same errand." Then she turned to page 4 and put her finger on it. "The mortgage has a balloon. It was written as a 5-year note the way the little banks out here write them, and it's been renewed twice. And a renewal is a thing somebody at that bank gets to decide again every time. The whole unpaid balance came due on the 1st of September of this year, $71,300, in one piece, in September. And she asked me what my father's income was, and I said Social Security and whatever the ground rent's for, and she asked what he owed on the house in town, and I said I had no idea, and she said, 'Find out, because he's got about 5 months and there's only 3 ways this goes, and 2 of them end with a sheriff's sale of your kitchen. That's the sentence that got me up out of the chair. Everything up to that point had been about 8 years ago. This was about September. Now let me stop and give my father the paragraph he's got coming, because I've told you the worst of him and there's more to it than that, and I'd rather you heard it from me. In 1987, my grandfather lost 220 acres, not to a bank, to his own brother, over a handshake about a line fence and 40 years of who was farming what, and there was nothing written down anywhere by anybody. And at the end of it, the ground went to my great-uncle and my grandfather kept the house and 11 acres, which is the 11 acres I am sitting in right now. My father was 32. He drove his own father to the sale. I know one more thing, because my mother told me in April, standing in the driveway, both of us with our arms folded. In 1987, my grandfather went into a lawyer's office in Foxburg and came out and never went back. And after that, he wouldn't have a thing to do with any of it. And my dad has never in his life set foot in a lawyer's office where he was the one asking. So, there's a whole man in that. A boy who watched paper take a farm and decided the paper was what did it. Who came out of that believing that the only real thing is a man's word in his own kitchen, and who then built a life out of the exact habit that had eaten his family, and handed it down to me at that table in 2014, wrapped in a blessing. I have sat with that. I sat with it for 4 months, and I'm still sitting with it, and here's where it stops. Whatever 1987 did to my father, it didn't walk him into Fentress County savings on the 4th of September, 2018, and it didn't sit him down in front of a notary, and it didn't stop him from driving 4 miles out and telling me. He had 8 years of Sundays. He had 146 chances, one on the 3rd of every month, when I handed him a check with 2 words on it in my own handwriting. Being frightened of paper explains why a man won't sign one. It does not explain a man who signs one where you can't see it. The last week of April, my father called about the birthday. Mom's is the 9th of May, and it's been at the home place every year since 1979, which means since 2014, it's been at my house, and I do it. I make the burnt sugar cake because that's the one she wants, and it's the only cake I can make. He called on a Tuesday evening and talked for 6 or 7 minutes about nothing. The rain, a fellow's hay, and then he got where he was going. I'm going to bring some papers out on the 9th, he said. Get it all squared away and get that off your mother's mind. She's been after me about it. I said, oh, all right. And he said, there's a gal at Fentress that'll walk you through the loan part. She's real good. I already talked to her. Won't take you 20 minutes. I said something. I don't remember what. I already talked to her. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and looked out at the spruce line my grandmother planted and understood the shape of the whole thing at once. He'd already been to the bank. He'd sat down with somebody at Fentress County Savings and used my name in a sentence before he'd said one word to me. And the way he was going to get it done was to put it in front of me on my mother's birthday in front of 11 people, where saying no isn't a legal position, it's a scene. That's when it stopped being something that happened in 2018. That's when I started sleeping about 4 hours. I saw the paper for the first time at the table. I want that understood. I did not know what was in that folder until he handed it to me, and I never asked to see it early, and I never told him what was in mine. I spent the 8 days before the 9th deciding what I was and wasn't going to do, and Rochelle helped me with the list, and the list was short. I would not say anything until he brought it up. I would not lie about anything I was asked. I would answer whatever got asked of me in that kitchen, out loud, in front of everybody, with the actual documents, because if I answered it quietly in a hallway afterward, it would become a family disagreement, and family disagreements out here get settled by whoever tells it best at the next funeral. And I made the cake. The 9th of May was a Saturday, and it came up warm and green. I had the windows open. Sydney did the table and put the good cloth on it crooked, and I left it crooked. Rodney hosed the porch off. Gwen drove up from Newbern with her husband and their 2, and Marv Prater came at 2 because I'd asked him, and my mother's friend from church came, and my dad's cousin and his wife. 11 people counting us. Mom came in with her hair set, and she stood in my front room and said the light in here in May. And she said it every year. And every year I said, I know it. The tote bag hung where it always hangs, inside the back door. And there were 4 things in it. 2 certified copies of a mortgage, 12 declarations pages with the mortgagee box on 7 of them, 11 carbon checkbooks with rubber bands around them, and 1 page of my handwriting on a legal pad with the arithmetic on it, done twice, both times the same. That afternoon did not feel brave from the inside. Not for 1 minute of it. I set the ham out and cut the pickles and laughed at my brother-in-law's story about the deer in the swimming pool, and every 20 minutes or so, a cold hand went through me from my throat to my knees. We ate at 1. Mom opened her cards. Sydney had made her a card with a drawing of the house on it, and around 2:30, with the plates pushed back, and the coffee going, and the cake sitting on the counter, with 13 candles in it, because that's all I had, my father stood up and gave a toast. It was a good toast, that's the thing. He talked about my mother in 1978, and the flowers she does at church, and how she has never once, in 49 years, let anybody leave her house hungry, and Gwen cried. And I did too. And then he came around to it the way he always does, easy as anything. And this ground's been in this family since 41, he said. And it's staying that way. And people said amen, and hear the way they do. Then he reached down beside his chair and brought up a manila folder and set it on my table and slid it down in front of me and laid a pen on top of it. Go ahead and get that done, honey. We're not cutting that till this is signed. Sydney had the matches in her hand. I opened the folder. There were 2 pages, and I read them in that kitchen with 11 people watching me read, and nobody said anything, because everybody assumed it was a formality, because that's exactly what it was designed to look like. It was a contract for deed. New. Typed. Not ballpoint. Same property. Purchase price. $71,300. Payable in full at closing on or before the 1st of September of this year. And down at the bottom of the 2nd page, in a paragraph the same size as everything else, all sums heretofore paid by the purchaser shall be retained by the seller as liquidated damages for the use and occupancy of the premises. This agreement supersedes any and all prior agreements between the parties, whether written or oral. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I read the date on the 1st page again. The 1st of September. His balloon is the 1st of September. That paper wasn't written for me. It was written for the bank. It was the piece of paper he needed to put in front of a loan officer at Fentress County Savings, so that the $71,300 he owed them in 4 months would become $71,300 that I owed them, and he could keep the house in town, and my 12 years would be gone in 1 sentence that nobody at my table could read. I set it down. I didn't raise anything. I've been told since that I got very quiet and that it was worse than yelling, and I'll take their word for it. Dad, I said, would you read that last paragraph out loud? He said, that's just the boilerplate. I know what it is, I said. I'd like you to read it. And he laughed and looked around the table for help, which is a thing I have watched him do successfully my entire life, and this time it took a half-second too long, and in that half-second, the room changed. My mother had stopped with both hands down in her lap, and she was looking straight at him. So I read it out loud instead, slow and flat, the same as when I have to sit across from a man in my office and tell him the barn isn't on his policy. Then I put it in English. It means the 12 years I already paid weren't buying anything, I said. It means they were staying here. And it means the first paper doesn't exist anymore. Gwen said, "That can't be what it says." "It's what it says," I said. And then I went and got that tote bag off its hook, and I did not make a speech. And I put 3 things on my own kitchen table one at a time. The certified copy of the mortgage opened to the 1st page. Dad put $96,000 on this house in September of 2018. It's recorded at the courthouse. Anybody can go look at it. It costs a couple dollars, and I've got a 2nd copy in the truck if anybody wants to. The declarations pages, fanned out, 7 with the box filled in. My own insurance told me, every August, for 7 years. And the shoebox of carbon checkbooks with the rubber bands on them. 146 payments. $87,600. On a $74,000 house. There's 2 words in the memo line of every one of them, and the words are, house payment. Nobody touched anything. My father's cousin picked the mortgage up, read 4 lines of it, set it back down, and slid it away from himself. Then my dad went through it, and he went through it in an order I've thought about a lot since, because I think it's the order most people go. First, he was hurt. He said he'd carried us for 12 years, and this was what he got. He said Rodney couldn't have gotten a loan from anybody in this county in 2014, laid off half of every winter, and everybody at this table knew it. Then it was somebody else's fault. It was the banks, for telling him in January they weren't renewing him again. Then it was the 2019 year, when the ground didn't make anything. Then, and this is the one I'll be hearing for a while, he said Mom's knee surgery. And my mother said his name one time, just Elwood, and he stopped that line. And then he went where he always goes, and he laid his hand out on my table. This is family, he said. We don't paper each other in this family. 3rd time. And I said, you did though. That's all I said. Then I gave him the date, because the date is the whole thing. September 4th, 2018. 9:51 in the morning, in front of a notary in Foxburg. You papered me 8 years ago, Dad. You just did it where I couldn't see it. September 4th. He looked at me, and I watched him understand that everybody at that table had heard it, and that it was going to be told at the fair, and at the co-op, and at the next funeral, and that he was not going to be able to be the one who told it. And then he reached for the last thing he had. There is no contract, he said. There's nothing that says any of that. He said it looking straight at me. Not at Rodney, not at Gwen, at me, because he knew. He'd known since March, from 3 Sundays of me asking him for a copy, that I didn't have one. That's what all that dig it out of the barn was. He wasn't stalling. He was checking, and my mother stood up. She didn't say anything. She went out through the front room and out the front door, and we heard her car door, and then we heard her come back in, and the whole kitchen just sat there. She had an envelope in her hand. A cattail mutual envelope, the long kind, folded once, the long way. Soft at the crease, the way paper gets when it's been in the same fold for years. She set it down on the table in front of me. Then she sat back down in her chair and put her hands in her lap. It was the carbon copy. The second sheet off the pad, the one that stays in the book, purple ballpoint, gone brown. March the 11th, 2014. $74,000, $600 a month for 15 years. The legal description in my father's blocky capitals. 4 signatures, and hers is the witness line, and she'd signed it, Ida M. Bortner, in the round hand she learned at Tarlton Consolidated in 1968. She'd torn it out of the pad that same day. She'd had it for 12 years. My father looked at that envelope like he'd never seen it in his life, and I don't believe he had. Ida, he said. I know, she said. That was the whole conversation. 2 people, 49 years, 4 words. Gwen said, into the quiet. Mom, where's that been? And my mother said, in the sewing cabinet, under the bobbins. She'd kept it in the tray of her singer, in the front room of the house in town, 12 years, 4 miles from me. Through every Christmas, he said the ground's been in this family since 41. Through every Sunday, I asked him for a copy while she ran water in the sink. My father got his hat. That's how it ended. He picked his hat up off the counter, and he went out the front, and his cousin got up and went after him, and the screen door clapped twice. I didn't follow him. I stood at my own table, and Marv Prater, who hadn't said a word all afternoon, put his hand on my shoulder on his way past and said, "You did that right," which from Marv is a paragraph. And then, because there were 11 people in my kitchen and a woman turning 68, I got the matches out of my daughter's hand and I lit the candles and we sang, and my mother blew them out on the first try, and I cut that cake and everybody ate a piece of it, and I have thought since that it was the strangest and maybe the most decent hour of my life. Here's what happened after, and it moved the way real things move, which is slow, and then all at once, and mostly by mail. Rochelle sent 2 letters on the 12th of May, one to my father, one to Fentress County Savings, with the contract, the carbon, the payment history, and the 12 declarations pages, and a sentence in it that I asked her to read to me twice on the phone. That the buyers have been in open possession and current on payments for 146 consecutive months. Banks do not want a foreclosure with a photograph of a farmhouse and a 13-year-old in it. Fentress County Savings wanted $71,300. That's all they ever wanted. My parents listed the house in town on the 2nd of June. It sold on the 8th of August for $172,000, and after what they owed on it, there was $54,000, and every dollar of that went to Fentress County Savings on the 29th of August, 3 days before the balloon. That left $17,300 on my house. Rodney and I borrowed it from Broadhead Federal Credit Union at the same desk where Krista had turned her monitor around in February, and she handled it herself and never once said anything about that morning. Rochelle wrote it so the $20,400 I still owed on the contract came off against what he'd put on the place, and my father signed that because his other choice was a courtroom in the county where he has lived his entire life. The release recorded on the 11th of September. The deed went in behind it 11 minutes later. $28 and a Tuesday morning, and Marcella at the counter said congratulations and stamped it. And for the first time in 12 years, the name Carleen Petree exists in the index at the Fentress County Courthouse. My father did not come to the closing. My mother did. She sat next to me and signed where she was told, and afterwards she said, well, that was all she had, and I understood it. They live in a rented duplex on Fillmore Street now, in town, with the singer in the front room because there wasn't a wall long enough for it anywhere else. That was September. It's October now, and I'll tell you about a Saturday. Rodney set the new furnace on a pad in the cellar in the last week of September, and the first cold morning it came on at 5-something and woke me up, and I lay there and listened to my own house get warm. Sydney's list is still taped inside the cabinet door with the cereal. She added a line to it in September, number 21, and it says, "Get the deed framed," and I told her we're not framing a deed. That's a strange thing to hang on a wall, and she said fine. Then number 21 is "Bench under the spruce," and Rodney mixed the pad for it on the 4th of October and pressed her hand into the corner, and she's 13, and she let him. There's a nail over my washing machine now. Marv gave me the idea without meaning to, and I never told him where I got it. Every piece of paper about this house goes on it and then into the file. And the first thing I do when the mail comes in off the road is open it, standing up, at the counter, before my coat's off, and write the date in the top right corner in pencil. Joanne laughed at me when I told her. Then she said, "It only took you 19 years," and went back to her renewals. The carbon copy is in the fire safe, in a plastic sleeve, not framed, same drawer as the birth certificates, and I don't have to explain that to anybody who's gotten this far with me. I talk to my mother on Sundays. We talk about the church flowers and Sydney's band and whether the duplex gets enough light. And it's easy, and it's real, and there's a whole room in it we don't go into. She kept that paper in a sewing cabinet for 12 years, while I paid a man $600 a month and asked him 3 times for a copy of it. She could have handed it to me in March. She could have handed it to me in 2018. I don't know what 49 years in a house with a man like my father does to a woman's arithmetic about what she's allowed to do, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've got that figured out. What I know is that when the whole table was looking at me, she got up and went out to her car. My father sent word through Gwen in October that he'd like to come out and look at the bench. I haven't answered that yet. I'm going to. I just haven't yet. And I've quit apologizing to myself about the timing. The back step is still the first thing you hit coming out my kitchen door. Her hand in it, and the date under it, scratched in with a 16-penny nail by a man who didn't know he was the only one of us writing anything down that summer. I used to think a family that didn't need paper was a family that trusted each other, that the paper was what strangers used because they couldn't do it the good way. Now I know paper is just the part of a promise that keeps working after somebody changes his mind about you. It's not the opposite of trust. It's what's left standing when the trust gets tired. That's my story. 146 check stubs, a little box on an insurance page that nobody reads, and a carbon copy under a tray of bobbins. So here's what I'd ask you to do this week, and it's free, and it takes 4 minutes. Go get your homeowner's policy out of whatever drawer it's in and find the box marked mortgagee or loss payee. It's about 2/3 of the way down the right side. If there's a name in that box you don't recognize, that is not a clerical error, and it is not how they set it up for the taxes. And if you're buying a place from family on a contract, take that contract to the recorder's office and record it. It costs less than a tank of gas, and that is the whole distance between a promise and a fact. If you know somebody who's been paying on something for years on nothing but a handshake and a good man's word, send them this one. Not to scare them, just so they go look. Tell me in the comments what you've been paying on, and whether it's written down anywhere. And subscribe if you want to sit out here with us again. That's all of it. Thank you for sitting with me on the porch tonight. I'll see you in the next one.